Hey everybody, we are back in the shanty. I missed a week. I know. I'm sorry about that, but I was a little busy last week. I know that's no excuse for my faithful followers, but I was a little busy last week. But we're back. We're back in today. So, a couple of weeks ago, middle of February, maybe a month ago now, one of our litigation partners, a guy named Tom Ammon, very good lawyer named Tom Ammon, wrote an e-alert called the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act of 2021. And he did a really good job on it. And when it came out, I read it. And like a lot of you, I probably went, oh, that's really nice and that's very interesting. But we don't do arbitration. And why is Congress worried about arbitration of sexual harassment claims? What difference does it make to them? Well, as some of you might know, this is the latest in a string of things that Congress is doing around sexual harassment that was, many people think, kicked off by the Me Too movement, which is to get sexual harassment into the public eye, if you will, so that you can't just quietly settle these things. Now, I'm not a huge, big fan of and they did that, by the way, with, there was earlier legislation several years ago now that says if you have a confidentiality provision in your sexual harassment release, you don't get the tax benefits of whatever those severance payments are to that employee, or the settlement payments. I've never been a really big fan of arbitration myself in these contexts. I don't think, and most of my clients, by the way, most of you people don't have pre-dispute arbitration agreements. As a matter of fact, years and years and years ago, I wrote that if you are going to do that, you need to do it in a separate standalone agreement. You don't want to do it in a provision in your handbook. But with all that being said, one of the reasons why people do like these arbitration provisions is arbitration is private. It's not in the public eye. So you can keep the facts of these cases private. And of course, when you get sued in either federal or state court, that is a public record. It's out there. Everybody gets to know about it if they want to know about it. And if you live in a city or a town with somebody in the press that hangs around the courthouse to see who's getting sued, you might end up on the front page of, I don't know, the Midland Daily News or the Detroit Free Press, although not likely, or the Grand Rapids Press. That's all a very long-winded way of saying I ran across a case yesterday that just blew my mind and was a roadmap for how not to handle a complaint of sexual harassment. And that's what I want to talk about today, very, very briefly. Although I blah, blah, blah already, not so briefly, right? The case involved a major fast food chain. I'm not going to give you the name of the major fast food chain, but you'll see it if you go read the EEOC's press release. And when I say case, I mean there has been a complaint filed by the EEOC. This case has not been litigated yet. Let's get that out of the way. But the facts of this case are just so, the facts as the EEOC alleges them are just so astounding that I thought we ought to talk about it. Let me just read a little to you, okay? In 2019, a 29-year-old service manager, and remember, this is a fast food restaurant, began to target a 16-year-old worker with unwelcome sexual comments, touching, and requests for sex. After a different service manager reported her concerns with the 29-year-old service manager's behavior, the general manager failed to investigate, problem number one, and instead warned the teen that she could be fired for engaging in an inappropriate relationship with the service manager. Okay, let's stop right there. Now let's assume for a second that these facts as they are alleged by the EEOC is true. They might not be, but let's assume they are. And I say they might not be because many of you have had EEOC complaints filed against you, and you know that the allegations in those complaints were completely false and made up, and that might be the case here too. But let's just assume for purposes of this little lesson from Professor Palazzolo that these facts are true. What's the first thing that this company did wrong? Apart from hiring this guy, which clearly was not the right decision. Okay, we've got a manager complaining to her manager. In other words, she's a service manager complaining to a general manager who ought to know better that this 29-year-old guy is stalking, I don't know, engaging in inappropriate conduct with a 16-year-old employee. 16-year-old employee. And what does the general manager do? Does he investigate? No. Should he have investigated? Oh, yes. Instead, he goes to the employee and says, if you're having a relationship with this supervisor, you could get in trouble for that. Now, let's just for a minute forget that she's 16 years old, and let's just talk about the supervisor-subordinate dynamic. You guys have all had situations, and if you haven't, you will at some point, where a supervisor and a person that they supervise have a relationship. And it might be completely and wholly consensual. And we're going to set aside the fact that she's 16 years old and the whole issue of consent in this case. Let's assume we're talking about two adults. Is the appropriate response to that relationship to penalize the subordinate? No! It is not the appropriate response to penalize the subordinate. If you're going to penalize anybody, you penalize the supervisor. And I don't care who's the man and who's the woman, or if it's two men and two women. It's the person with the power that's breaking the rule. All right? The person with the power that's breaking the rule. So that's problem number one. He didn't investigate. And problem number two is he threatened the employee, the subordinate, not the supervisor. He also didn't move anybody, all right? The general manager continued to schedule the teen to work a closing shift with the alleged harasser. Eventually, the service manager sexually assaulted the teenage worker and began subjecting others to harassment. What a shock. So let's keep this 16-year-old person working at night, presumably alone or with very few other people, working with the guy that is alleged to have been harassing her. Problem number two. You separate them until you figure out what's going on. You separate them. All right. In 2020, the restaurant management again failed to take appropriate action upon receiving a new complaint of sexual harassment, now this time regarding a 24-year-old crew member who made comments about the bodies of several workers and referred to them with unwelcome nicknames like mama, sweetheart, and baby girl. This time, the restaurant agreed to investigate the complaints, but permitted the alleged harasser to return to the workplace where he angrily confronted those who had complained about the harassment. Fearing for their safety because of management's inaction, the two workers quit. Let me tell you what this is. This is a law review or a law school examination question. What do we got here? We got quid pro quo sexual harassment, a supervisor and a subordinate, 16-year-old subordinate too. I'm having a hard time getting past that. And a sexual assault alleged. Then on top of that, we have hostile work environment sexual harassment, a 24-year-old crew member who's making comments about the bodies of several coworkers and referring to them with nicknames like mama, sweetheart, and baby girl. Quid pro quo sexual harassment, hostile work environment sexual harassment, and just to put the icing on the cupcake, retaliation. when they threatened the worker who was being harassed by the supervisor with potential job action if she had a inappropriate relationship with the manager. Okay, so none of this is new, right? Other than the fact that I'm so obviously morally outraged by the whole thing that I can't hardly tolerate it. So why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about it because it's 2022. Now, these things allegedly happened in 2019 and 2020, just in the middle of a pandemic. We're talking about it because this sort of thing still happens. And you've got to be in a position to make sure that when it does, you don't act like this fast food restaurant acted. Instead, you act in the appropriate way. So when somebody comes to you and complains, what do? You investigate. No matter what. You do not threaten to discipline the person who comes to you to complain. Now, if they made the complaint up, or if they're not acting in good faith, you might have grounds to discipline them. But generally speaking, you better have something in your policy that says we don't retaliate against people who in good faith bring a complaint. So what do we do to prevent this stuff from happening? Well, you and I both know that we can't prevent it. We can just do everything we can to minimize it. We start with a really good policy. We've been in a pandemic for 2 years. When's the last time you looked at your harassment policy? Might want to do it right now, okay? Number two, your managers and supervisors have to know what to do when this happens. And how do you do that? You train. All right, now, 2 things for you to remember here. Number one, if you don't want to do live training, and you don't want to get to that point yet, although I think we are at the point now where a lot of us are going back to doing live training. I'm doing some in a couple of weeks. We have a harassment video that you can purchase from us, that you can use with your managers and supervisors, that is about 55 minutes long, about an hour long, and it's my handsome, lovely face standing in front of a PowerPoint training your managers and supervisors on sexual harassment and what to do when they encounter it. If you're interested in that, give us a call. Or if you're interested in doing live training, like I said, I think most of us are back to doing live training now. You might want to think about doing some training. Because I know that it's been a while. And you know that it's been a while. And it's been a while because for the last 2 years, we've been getting on this thing and talking about nothing but COVID. I'm not saying COVID's over, but we cannot let these things slide. And you might have a whole bunch of new managers and supervisors that you didn't have when the pandemic began, and they might not know anything about this. So, in order for you to avoid this kind of a problem, where management in your facility does something this stupid, allegedly, you might want to think about doing some training. That's my commercial for today. How about that? It's good seeing you all again. I'll see you next time.